I'm gonna have to stop it and restart, I think. I don't know, it's gonna screw everything up, I bet. Well, looks like I messed it up. I apologize, folks. Oh, there we go. Now it's live. So anyway, I'm just going to start completely over right there because the YouTube feed did not get kicked off right then. I had a setting wrong on Restream, so I apologize, folks, for that. But I was just saying that I spent the last couple weeks doing some heavy-duty research on Judaism and Islam, discovering lots of stuff in the primary texts that not too many people out there are willing to discuss, and I appreciate the people who've sent donations for early copies of the work. I'm going to send people who donate $10 or more for the show and the work this week. I'm going to send them an early version of it. It's not quite finished yet, but it's almost done. But you might have to wait a few more days before I actually get it out there. For those of you on Facebook and Twitter, etc., you're probably getting a double introduction tonight. My apologies for that. Dr. Tonya Yoney was on about 3 weeks ago, and thanks for coming back, Tonya.
You're welcome.
And so anyway, I haven't done a regular show for the last few weeks because I've been doing research, and this article ended up being about 117 pages so far. So anyway, been a lot of work to get it going and get it finished, up till about 2 or 3 every night for the last couple weeks working on it. So how has it been going, Dr. Yoney?
It's been busy at the our COVID clinic basically, and then my regular office schedule. We've had to switch over to Zoom from home, so I see those patients online only starting this past Monday from my home. So that's something new to get used to. I have an older patient population, and Zoom's not always easy for them.
And I'm sure it's hard to get a real checkup on somebody over a camera with audio.
It is. The group I work with, luckily, we have some physicians we designated as doctors of the day. So if I have a patient I speak to that I think must see a physician, have a doctor lay their hands on them, I'll call the doctor of the day and get the patient in to be seen.
Wow, crazy. So, and you've been seeing reports of doctors being spit on and their cars vandalized, etc., for
Yes,
COVID.
I've seen this mainly back east. I've seen some articles from, let's see, I think New York City, Florida, and one article from Tulsa, which is actually a nurse I read about. Luckily, here where I live in Southern California, it's been the exact opposite. I mean, people have been very supportive. My last shift at the COVID clinic, someone was kind enough to donate the entire staff free coffee. So,
Nice. And have you seen more healthcare workers getting sick lately, or ending up in clinics than
um,
the normal public almost, or?
I have lately. I think where we live in Southern California, we peaked probably last week. And as that peak goes down, it's now the healthcare workers I'm seeing more of. Because, of course, we're going to get it later because we have proper protection. But even with the best proper protection, even healthcare workers, can acquire it. Most of the ones that I know that were diagnosed um, contracted it outside of work.
Really? Are you allowed to discuss any of that?
I can't discuss anything personal or too private, but luckily the group I work for, they have been fantastic at providing correct masks, shields, all proper protective equipment. So they've been fantastic with that. So the few cases I do know of healthcare workers, most of them contracted at home from family because we can do the best that we can at work, but once you go home and your spouse, your children, maybe your in-laws live with you, it's it increases the risk of exposure.
What about? Let me see. I just closed this. You had a patient who was 65 who died a couple weeks ago,
Yes.
and you've only had one patient die so far of it.
I've had two patients. One lady was 84, and then this was a 65-year-old gentleman.
And so for a population of your city about 45, 50,000, that's two people. And they've had, in our region, they announced this week that they've had 50 people die out of about 1.5 million or so who live in the county. So
And if
much,
that's the case, 10 of those were at the nursing home that I
right.
used to work at.
And so, and that was in the same town as you. So out of those 50, 12 in the same couple few miles of each other.
Hmm.
Interesting. And so for the rest of the county, where I live, they've only had two cases, I think, something
5.
like 5. And then, but I think the county, they said 1,000 people so far, but 50 deaths. So we're talking compared to 1.5 million people, 50 deaths and 1,000 people getting it. That's like 0.00 some percent, way less than
Yes.
they said. So, and there's been a lot of rumors out there that the tests give an 80% false positive. But in your
Um,
experience, what have you seen?
well, I know the research indicates that the test already has a 30% false negative rate, which means 30% of the time you test a patient that has the virus, it may come back negative incorrectly. That's what the manufacturer states. But it's been my experience, I would say for some patients, it's closer to 50%. I've had many patients where the test is negative.
And these are false negatives, not false positives.
Correct. They're false negatives. And the patients tested negative, but based on their exam and history, I ordered a chest x-ray because luckily we have a machine right there. And they all had classic COVID findings on chest x-ray. There's something they call ground glass opacities. It's just a certain appearance that you learn about on chest x-ray. When you see that, when I was in medical school, when I saw that, that meant tuberculosis. And there is not a TB outbreak going on right now. So the other thing it means at this time would be COVID.
Did you see that White House short clip that came out recently saying that it was a hoax? Or not asking if it was a hoax. He says, so it was a hoax, but it was a short clip. It was a hot mic at the White House, and they didn't mean to broadcast it really. But,
I didn't see that.
he says it was, they say on the White House thing that it was massively overblown. Here, I'm going to just show this here. But people can look this up. I'm not going to play it right now, but people can check that out. It's just a short clip. He's saying, the guy replies, no, I don't think it's a hoax, but he does say that it was severely overblown.
I think it
So,
was. I think part of it was overblown for whatever reason. And part of it too, here in Southern California, we did enact the isolation measures early on, which did bring down the curve, but the curve's been brought down so much now that we need to do something about it. Because the whole point of isolation was not to prevent all disease contraction. That's impossible. We do want people to become immune. So any disease process out there, it's normal to be exposed, but we didn't want them all exposed and becoming ill at once to overwhelm the healthcare system. We're fine. The hospitals I don't work at, but I work with, our clinic, we're doing great. We have, plenty of staff. So there's no reason to keep the curve down so low.
and interestingly, more people than expected in the Bay Area already have the antibodies for this that they were
Mhm.
tested. Do you want to talk about that?
Um, I didn't read the full article. I've been kind of busy, but from what my opinion would be that back in December, January, Southern California had this huge viral outbreak that we called a flu-like illness. I saw patients at my office,
I had it.
patients, patients through the urgent care. Basically, they tested negative for strep, they tested negative for flu, and it was the worst illness any patient, any doctor had seen, the worst viral illness, but it wasn't flu. And it went through my kids, my family, and we didn't know what it was. I suspect that's what we're having now because Southern California is the top travel destination for most people from China.
Well, I was sick as hell for like 8 days in early January or something like that, and it was pretty tight. Thank you, Dashing Rogue, for the super chat there, much appreciated. But it felt like hell. Couldn't get out of bed for days. All I did was pretty much sleep, and get up and eat and use the bathroom for a few days. But it was a miserable experience, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what went around then. And then, and then they shut down the whole global economy, and it was, probably overblown. And, I spoke with John Kleisick on the show last week, and we were discussing how you can't prove a lack of evidence regarding the shutdown, and if the quarantine of the global population really helped or not, and I'm sure it did to an extent, but we can't really prove it. And then, I think it was an estimated 260,000 suicides in the month of March alone from the collapse of the economy and all this sort of thing. So then we have these other issues coming up from the destruction of the economy that will probably take far more lives in the long run than COVID did. And what is the estimate right now, if it's accurate, about 40,000?
For what?
For COVID, 40,000 deaths.
I believe so.
And so if the antibody tests are accurate, that means that the virus is even less virulent than it was expected it would be, correct?
Yes, correct.
And so, and then what age group did you see getting infected more than you suspected they would?
I was trained and taught that it would be mainly senior citizens, 65 and older. I mainly saw patients, the most patients I saw were between the ages of 18 and about 55.
Really? Wow. And
I,
and none of them died, though.
luckily, none of mine did. Correct.
Well, that's good. So, and somebody is asking for 260,000 suicide source. The convenient thing, Chaz, is that you have this Google thing right in front of you. You can type it in and see what you find. I didn't verify that, but that's what I have understood. So everybody has Google right at their fingertips. You can look into that. And rather than asking me for the source right in the middle of the show, let's see. That would make more sense in my opinion. And so, hydroxychloroquine.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had any experience prescribing that?
That's a hot topic still. I did write for it for one patient. I was able to write it for her. Unfortunately, the pharmacies were out completely, and she still landed at the hospital for that very reason. She couldn't get it filled. So they kept her for 3 days, and they gave her hydroxychloroquine with Zithromax and zinc,
In the hospital.
Just like I prescribed for her. They even gave it to her orally, like I prescribed for her. And they discharged her home, and the case manager called around and found one pharmacy that still had some in stock. So when she left, she was able to go get her medication, and it worked.
And
Within
so
12,
how
within 12
bad?
hours,
What's that?
within 12 hours, she started turning around.
Interesting. So let's see. And you've heard of a lot of hospitals have been closing down and people being laid off, et cetera, because there's no other surgeries and whatnot going on, correct?
Everything elective has been stopped. Every hip replacement, knee surgery, anything that's not urgent or life-threatening has been stopped. There are so many people who are not working, from doctors and nurses down to, I spoke to a pathology technician who's basically working part-time because her job is to study pathology of tissue samples of biopsies they do in surgery. So the trickle-down effect's kind of amazing.
And other doctors and medical professionals, their salaries have been cut in half.
Yes, I've spoken to several colleagues of mine across the country that I know. Um, their insurance system, the way they get reimbursed is different than where I work. And most of those doctors had to take a minimum 25% pay cut, some as much as 50 and 75%.
Wow. And for somebody who's paying $3,500 a month for school loans, that's quite a bit.
Yes.
So that could potentially put doctors out on the streets as homeless. So somebody just clued in. Culture versus Man just said gin and tonic instead of vaccines. Then, so one of my next, actually, excuse me, my very next topic was Schweppes tonic water has quinine in it.
Correct. And basically, the medication chloroquine is synthetic quinine. Basically, it was invented. They can manufacture it more easily and keep the dose more standardized by making synthetic version of chloroquine. And then they developed hydrochloroquine, but all came from quinine. Quinine as a supplement, I think, was taken off the market. So it's a little bit harder to come by, or was it the prescription? But you can get Schweppes tonic water with quinine. I saw at the grocery store, some of the off brands have it too, but you must read the bottle. It must say with quinine.
Right.
Now, the
So, yeah, some of the generic brands have it, but what was the brand that did not have it? And one of the big brands, right?
was it Canadian Mist?
Oh,
Maybe
oh, Canada Dry did not have it.
that's it. Canada Dry. But the thing is, I can't tell you the dosing. I can't recommend anything because I'm not anyone's physician on here. But it's basically synthetic. I mean, it's the natural version of chloroquine, which is what we use to treat the disease. Now, for people who already consume alcohol, switch to a gin and tonic. Be careful though, because too much quinine can have side effects.
Funny. Well, this Canada Dry image shows it does contain quinine in it, but where is? Do you have any idea where it comes from? Let me see. Natural occurrence. Bark is cheaper. Let me
Wasn't the
see.
wasn't the Jesuit bark or something like
Bark
that?
of the cinchona.
It's a bark.
Yeah, it's a bark. Okay. Barks like a dog. So interesting. So there was there are some people in the. Actually, I'll hit that in a few minutes. But what about zinc? And you mentioned zinc a minute ago as well. That's a big help as well, right?
Yes, correct. Zinc not only helps the immune system prevent or fight off disease, not just COVID, it's a part of the treatment protocol that we give to COVID patients of the hydrochloroquine, the zinc, and the Zithromax. Now, they're now starting to only give the hydrochloroquine with zinc because the combination of the Zithromax with the hydrochloroquine does increase the rate of a rare cardiac risk called prolonged QT syndrome. Very rare. I've never seen it, thank goodness, but it can happen. So now it's basically just the zinc and the hydrochloroquine. But we're running out of zinc too. It's hard to find.
Right. So, and then the proper dosage of zinc is what, 200 or 220 milligrams, and you can only
Two,
get low dose, correct?
yes, it's 220 per day for treatment of COVID. So if you know you have it, that's the treatment dose. The preventative dose to prevent illness, I think, is 25 to 50 milligrams per day. Because high dose zinc too long can cause side effects as well.
Now, I would imagine, people talking about drinking alcohol with their tonic water, that the alcohol would have the exact opposite effect and not be a benefit, correct?
Too much alcohol consumption can decrease the immune system. Also, typical tonic water contains a lot of sugar, and sugar deactivates white blood cells.
For
So if
about
you're going
20 minutes. So,
for 20 minutes, therefore, if you're going to do that, choose the diet. Yes, it has artificial sweetener, which is probably terrible for you too, but that's long term down the road from continued heavy use. If this is short term use during a pandemic, I think the saccharin is safer than the sugar.
is that what they have, saccharin in it instead of erythritol or whatever it's called?
Yeah, this is the last time I looked.
Yeah. So it's like drinking Tab back in the 80s.
Yes, my grandmother drank that.
Wow. I remember I saw it back in the stores recently. I was shocked to see
Why?
it.
It's ridiculous. It's gross.
So what do you feel about the removal of constitutional rights and all of this and just the whole shutdown of everything?
I feel torn. I feel so very torn. People don't understand. I'm very much a constitutional conservative, more of a libertarian. I don't believe in taking people's rights away. I believe, people, should have the right to, virtually anything within reason, as long as it's legal. But as a physician, it's also tough because I want what's best for my patients and the safety of my patients. And I don't like how people have lost a lot of their rights during the isolation, quarantine, shutdown, whatever you want to call it. But I do know if we had absolutely no change whatsoever in Southern California, it would have been worse. Yes, you can't prove a negative. I know that. But you can't prove I'm wrong either. And I just know we can compare ourselves to New York. And I have colleagues of mine who work in New York City, and it's been pretty severe. I have a colleague of mine right now who works in Minnesota, and he is one of the main physicians who works at the pork processing plant. And there's a massive outbreak there now. It's
Wow.
it's going to get severe there. Because I think I read there was 4,000 employees in this one plant, and it's so crowded there. When one person gets an illness, it's just going to spread like fire.
Now, quarantine is normally for sick people. What do you feel about quarantining healthy people? Isn't that what we call tyranny?
Typically, I think the reason they did this is because with COVID, there's asymptomatic carriers. People can have it for 5 days without having any symptom whatsoever. So if you only quarantine the ones that have symptoms, there's plenty of people walking around without symptoms. So I think that's the reason they did it. And, in true government fashion, they probably took many things overboard. Most people, I do believe, had good intent, probably not all of them. I mean, I think the local officials probably had good intent.
Right. I'd agree with you on that, at least, for the most part. And then you have, well, we'll get into that in a minute. So what about killing COVID with sunlight and people being outside?
Well, we touched a little bit on this on your last show, but when it comes to killing COVID with UV rays, it's actually UVC. And UVC rays, they don't reach the atmosphere the way UVA and UVB does. So you really can't use sun to kill the virus because the UVC is not concentrated enough. If it were, UVC is very damaging, would burn our skins instantly. But that being said, also being in the sunlight increases our vitamin D levels. It
Right.
helps our immune system. When you're outside, the you have the breeze going around. If you're near the ocean, it's probably the best place to be when you're sick, because if you would cough, you're not isolated in a house or a car with a person. You're much less likely to contaminate another person.
Well, speaking of cars, I see a lot of people, and you know what I'm going to say.
I do.
I see a lot of people in their cars by themselves with freaking masks on. Or my favorite, I live in a mountain rural community, and there is a lake here, and I see people walking around the lake by themselves with nobody else around with a freaking mask on.
It's not necessary. Even the local sheriff's department for where one of the ones where we live, for Riverside County, they even issued a statement that if you're by yourself in your vehicle or with your immediate family that you reside with, there's no need for a mask. If you're by yourself, you certainly don't need a mask whatsoever. What's the point? Save that mask for when it's needed.
I'm absolutely baffled every time I see this. So earlier today, I saw a gentleman, probably 60-ish, walking down the street by himself, nobody else around. He had surgical gloves on and a mask.
There's no need.
In a rural area in the woods with no one around.
Yeah, there's no need for that. He's better off to just.
I actually almost yelled down to him, you need to take that stuff off and breathe fresh air. And So do you suspect, now I spoke to one doctor in my local area, and he thought that we would begin to see an outbreak of colds and whatnot from people using dirty masks and breathing dirty air all the time. What do you think about that?
I mean, there could be a potential if people aren't cleaning their masks like they should. It's not that hard. The cotton ones are washable. People like me work in healthcare field. Even my N95 mask that I wear at the clinic, we have it sterilized at the hospital, so there's no need to wear it for more than one day. But having a mask on and the moisture collecting and breathing it back in again is not healthy. If nothing else, I mean, I've seen an increased rate of contact dermatitis, people getting a perioral rash from wearing the mask so much.
My local chiropractor actually told me he's been having an acne problem from wearing his mask all the time now.
I will say I have too, but I'm required to. I work with the COVID patients face to face.
Right.
I've noticed when I work at the clinic more, yeah, I've had more issues with my skin, but it's a good trade-off for me. It's worth it.
So Del Bridge, thanks for the super chat. He says, is the statistical data from the CDC WHO correct? And and we all know that Trump cut funding from the WHO from fudging everything already.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers he's speaking of. I mean, the WHO is such a liberal organization that I wouldn't trust anything they put out. The CDC is not far behind, which is sad.
Yeah, so you're not trusting of either organization. Now, here we go. What do you think about Bill Gates and his promotion of this new vaccine that he just slammed through? I mean, so a month ago, this thing supposedly spread, and then he's already been shipping a vaccine out for, what, a week and a half or 2 weeks now? So did he just have that in his back pocket ready to whip out? And, obviously he had the patents on this stuff already from 2019, apparently last summer.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust, I mean, my personal opinion, people need to talk their own position, of course, but I wouldn't trust a vaccine from the Gates Foundation whatsoever.
Now, this guy, Fauci, I have not verified that he is on the Gates board for vaccines.
I wouldn't be surprised. Things I've seen online, articles I've read, there's so many photographs, those two together, that my personal opinion is I think Trump unfortunately put his faith in the wrong physician.
Right. Well, and then Fauci was behind the whole AIDS epidemic thing back in the 80s, too. And I've interviewed a world-leading virologist, Dr. Peter Duesberg, about 9-10 years ago on that. And he had a lot to say about that whole scandal as well, on and off the air. He told me a lot more off the air than he said on the air. But basically, he was defunded up at UC Berkeley for telling the truth about the whole HIV equals AIDS thing, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. And so let's see. So you're not pro Fauci, not pro Gates. What do you people often throw out there? Well, you're a doctor. You had training. It's like anybody who has a job in anything has training of some sort. If you're a stockbroker, you get training. If you babysit, you get training to change diapers or whatever. But what do you say to people regarding vaccines in general? What's your stance on that?
We discussed this a little bit on your last show. I do think that there are several vaccines that the older vaccines that have lots of more research and plus just experience with patients, a lot of them, can be beneficial. I have less faith in the newer vaccines. They pushed out so quickly with less research. And in my career, there's a few vaccines that the pharmaceutical industry really seemed to pound hard on us. Like out of the middle of nowhere was suddenly told we must write this vaccine, we must do this. I'm like, no, I don't, there's nothing I must do. It's my degree. You can't tell me what to do. So I'm on the fence. There's certain vaccines that make sense and there's certain ones that don't. My patients, they know I talk with them, but ultimately it's their decision. I'm not going to browbeat them. I'm going to give them what they're comfortable with. And I can tell you, I'm not comfortable with a vaccine funded by the Gates Foundation.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And, I've seen some vaccine damage in my own family. So, years ago, I interviewed Dr. Andrew Wakefield on the MMR vaccine and his whole scandal. He lost his medical license for coming out against the MMR vaccine. And Richard Horton at The Lancet, who is one of his best friends out at the time, published a whole bunch of garbage against him and what he had exposed. But I think he probably did better on the lecture circuit going out against the MMR vaccine than he did as a doctor. But he's not against all vaccine sweeping generalization either. Lee McCamey, thanks for the super chat. He says, our Canadian officials decided that who were the people with our best interests, and so they just stood by and planted their fiddles. Thanks for that. I guess, stuck by the WHO organization. Well, Trump defunded the WHO and came out against them. We'll see if he outs Fauci and these guys anytime soon. I think, if Trump wants to save his ass for this whole thing, he really needs to distance himself from Fauci and fast.
I agree.
Let's see. And then there's Bill Gates going on TED Talk saying that he wanted to use vaccines to control the world population. Do you remember that? Did you ever see that clip?
I never actually saw that clip, but I've read about it, yes.
Oh, I've seen it many times. And then, on Catalina Island off of Los Angeles, back in the 1920s, they had a film crew brought out a bunch of bison for a movie. And then the bison grew into a large herd. And so when 2 years ago, I was on Catalina Island, and I came across on a window of the group that does the
tours.
Yeah, well, they do the tours, but they run the trust for Catalina Island.
Oh.
But they said that they were using shots, to control the bison population. They were using vaccines to control the population. Then just recently, within the last couple of months, I saw another one come out saying that California's deer population is out of control, because they've slandered and trashed and done so much to damage the hunters in California and make it difficult and make hunting licenses for the hunters like $200-300 and whatnot. So California doesn't have enough hunters so there's the solution they came up with was to vaccinate the deer population for fertility. So what's that? Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. It's like lower the hunting licenses, stop harassing hunters, and get them back out there. And then guess what? In a deer season, the problem would be solved.
I mean, I was born and raised in southwestern Pennsylvania, and trust me, the white-tailed deer population there is huge. And whenever the population would increase, they would increase the amount of tags available for hunters to use. And it's more than about hunting. I knew several men who they themselves didn't consume much deer. They would donate the meat to the local food pantries.
Well, I know somebody who a few years ago went deer hunting in Michigan and donated a deer to a family of 5 or 6 who parents were out of work and whatnot, and had several kids, and he donated the whole deer to them. So people ostracizing hunters and whatnot, it makes me sick. I used to have this business partner who I went on a duck hunting trip for Christmas, and he wouldn't talk to me for 3 weeks because I went on a duck hunting trip. Meanwhile, he would go to Sonic and eat burgers all the time. But, it was like, really, really strange beta male behavior. Let's see here. Do you have anything to, or let me see. Wrong one there. I should probably highlight that so I don't ask it again. We already talked about these last one. Other treatments except COVID are canceled, blah, blah, blah. What is your opinion about parks and whatnot being closed? Down in Huntington Beach, get this, which is between, or in Orange County at the ocean, obviously, They actually brought in bulldozers and filled in on the beach. They took beach sand and filled in the skate parks.
I saw that. I think it was ridiculous. Mostly the people who use that are, teenagers. And if you watch the video clip of them filling it in the background in the ocean are surfers.
So
So
are they going to fill in the ocean? And surfing is, skateboarding is surfing with wheels rather than waves.
correct.
And you're on a board, you're on a stick, and
Have you seen them skateboard? They're 6 feet apart minimum. If not, they'll crash into each other.
I think they're usually a lot more than that. I mean, yeah, well,
Yeah.
skateboarding, surfing, either way,
Yeah. I mean, I think they should be allowed to do that because these teenagers are going to go home and get stuck in the house, not get the sun, not get the fresh air they need. Or the whole reason they invented the skate parks was to prevent businesses from the skaters using the businesses, the rails, the stairs. So now they're going to,
go back to that.
they're going to go back to that. But from a healthcare standpoint, nothing is healthier than being in the fresh air and sun. It's common sense.
When I was probably 13 or 14, probably about my son's age, I got mononucleosis and was told I had to stay home for a couple of weeks and whatnot. And so every day my mom went to work and every day I went outside and skated. And after about 2.5 days, I was completely over it and went back to the doctors. The doctor was like, wow, it's like you never had it. What did you do? I went outside and I skated all day. So,
Well, if you look at some articles from about the Spanish influenza, was that like 1918, 1919? That one treatment they found to work was all the hospitals were turned to tents because obviously there weren't enough hospitals. They would either wheel the patients out in the sun or just take the top of the tent off and force the patient to lay in the sun and fresh air. And those patients had a much higher survival rate.
And this was obviously for something different, but when I was in Peru in 2009, I was doing live shows from the hospital, or not live shows, I was doing shows from the hospital there. The doctors sent me out of the hospital. I was supposed to be gone for 1 hour max to go to my son's birthday party. It was his 3rd birthday, and I wasn't supposed to make it through the night, but I ended up staying out for 2 hours and hanging out in the sunlight. And I came back 2 hours later to a group of nurses and doctors who were very upset with me for staying gone an extra hour. And but I felt so much better after getting sun for a couple hours because I'd been in the ICU for several days and come back in, and then they were able to start treatment that evening because they didn't think I would have the strength to even start treatment. They thought that I wouldn't make it through that night. So, that was like first week of last week of June, first week of July in 2000. What was it, 9? So that was a pretty sucky week. So, yeah, I can feel for these people who've had to spend a week in the ICU getting, treatment for crap. But let's see here. Let's see. I am my own authority bluntly. Just take what they say and process it. Yeah, that's why we give out the trivium, dues. If you lack knowledge, you can always find it if it matters. That's true. And you should use critical thinking and study some logic and not think with fallacies. The problem with most people is that they think with fallacies rather than using critical thinking and making sure that they verify their beliefs and whatnot. That's probably the biggest issue out there that I see. And studying a little bit of logic, learning the most basic 20 or 25 logical fallacies will take you a long way to keep yourself from falling into people's lies and your own lies for that matter. Because again, most people think with emotion rather than facts. So now that several weeks has gone by, how has this progressed differently for you than anticipated?
Obviously, we thought it would be more severe. When we enacted the stay-at-home order and we got to see how it was panning out in China, then Italy, then New York City, I fully expected it to be that severe in California. And it has not been, I think, partially due to the isolation, but again, we can't prove it.
Could it also be because of the sunnier weather here in California and
I
whatnot?
mean, I think part of it's isolation, the sunnier weather, and I really do think we were exposed back in December, January. I
Here,
can't
here.
wait until there's further antibody testing. The only problem we have right now are the current antibody tests in the market are not FDA approved. So I don't know how accurate they are.
Yeah. Well, I would like to see one of those antibody tests because I think I had it 3, 4 months ago. So I
I,
wouldn't mind getting tested for that.
I think my kids had it too.
So less numbers than expected. They said the Washington Times came out a few weeks ago and said, I think it was them that said it was 30 to 50 times, or Washington Post, 30 to 50 times exaggeration.
Like
From you know what they expected to what really happened, it was about 30 to 50 times exaggerated.
correct, or 30, 50 times, it was just incorrect. I want exaggeration. The word exaggerate just has a negative connotation, like it was intentional. I don't think it was always intentional.
I think there were some people who had vested interests,
Probably.
possibly like Gates and Fauci, etc., or
I think,
Fauci, whatever the hell his name is.
but I think like most physicians, most medical groups, most hospitals, we just took the numbers, as truth, and we prepared for what we thought was coming. So yes, it was exaggerated, but it's better to be overly prepared than underprepared, as
Right. Well,
one of my
as the
icky
old saying, yeah, as the old saying, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. As it
correct.
goes for first aid kits and firearms and spare
Exactly.
tires. So, I don't know if people in the audience have questions. We've pretty much wrapped up what we've prepared. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Not that I can think of at this time.
All right. And again, for those of you who missed the start of the show, I have been working on that article. It's about 117 pages on Islam versus Judaism, going through the Talmud and the Islamic texts and comparing them all. I've spent many, many hours and weeks and weeks and weeks working on it. For those of you who send a $10 or more donation, you can also, and the links are down below there for Cash App, for PayPal, for links to the website. Those of you who send your information and a donation, I will send out early copies of the PDF for that for people to look over, and it's going to be debunking a whole lot of bull crap out there. So let's see. No, I don't see anybody popping up any questions on there. So it looks
Wow.
like, yeah, last time we had a lot of questions.
Last time was, yeah, very busy.
Last time it was like people asking the same question over and over.
That's true. It was.
50 times greater than reality, than has been intentional false estimates, punishment due. Yeah, I mean, some people should definitely lose their jobs over that. Let's see, this lady scared the crap out of him. Neil says you scared the crap out of him the first time when you were on.
Sorry.
I
But
was.
if you look at the numbers that we had, the only numbers that I had available to me were the ones coming from the East Coast, Italy, China. So we were pretty petrified ourselves.
Now I had somebody on the listener of the show, Howard. Let's see if I can find his message here. I'm not going to say his last name, but he had lost a family member last week as well. And so, yes, while it was overblown and exaggerated, it was also real. It wasn't a hoax per se. The exaggeration is what the problem was. The shutting down of the economy is what the problem was. But,
Like right now, I know several patients who are still intubated, and one of them is a nurse that I don't work with, but a 40-something-year-old nurse at a separate hospital. She's currently ICU intubated. So
and
it can be
how
very
old?
devastating. I think she's 42
42. And
with
so
no health conditions,
I've been
healthy.
intubated before, and that freaking sucks. I don't recommend it
Yes.
to anyone. No thanks.
And now they have people in the prone position on their stomach instead of supine. So it's a new treatment method for the respiratory distress syndrome. So yeah, it's even less comfortable than it was before.
Oh, wow. So is that to help it drain or what? Yeah.
Yes, it's to help the lungs drain, and it helps less work for the lungs to actually move.
Wow. All right. Well, I appreciate your time for coming on again. I appreciate the audience. Please hit the like and subscribe and hit the little bell for notifications down there. Please send uh, your donations, your support, much appreciated. Any love you all can send. And let's see. Adam says, I want to add with your talk with Tonya today. We all around here think we had the virus in January too. Everybody knows 10 plus people that were sick then, but now it's hard to find someone who knows a person with COVID. Yeah, you know, in about 3 weeks ago or so, I interviewed somebody who had it, and
Yeah.
29 of his friends and their family members all had it too. And you know,
It depends where you're located, because in Southern California it's less severe. Obviously I'm going to know plenty of people with COVID since I'm a healthcare professional.
right.
But most people around here know at least one person who's had it, or their, you know, their friends, neighbors. Someone knows someone who's had it. Most people don't know someone who's died. I do, of course, because I worked in a senior community. But the different pockets, the different outbreaks across the country are so different. So when people in California are judging the illness based on the response in California, I think it takes away from the severity that's truly occurring in other places. In Tulsa, where I have colleagues, there's some really severe cases and there's some really busy hospitals there. New York City, my friend who works in Minnesota, it's going to get pretty ugly there. So we're lucky here that it wasn't as severe, but we got to be careful the way we judge this, because we're going to assume, oh, it's all been overblown, it's all been overhyped. To an extent, yes, but to these other areas, these other pockets, populations, I mean, don't take away from what they're going to be going through now in the future, because they're going to be losing a lot of people.
Well, and just keep in mind, you know, what the destruction of the economy will cause as well, and that's, you know, we haven't even seen the impact of that yet.
Oh, and that's tough. I mean, actually, I'm treating patients by Zoom appointments for having severe depression, anxiety, because their spouse have lost money. They're fearful of not being able to pay the utilities. They're calling in wanting medications for depression. I'm like, it's situational. Let's not medicate you. But it's I see both sides. There are people that are completely losing their livelihood because of this, and I I mean, everyone has their own opinion on this, but I do think that we need to try, at least in certain areas, pockets where we have gone past the peak, open up those economies slowly. Don't open all of a sudden, or we're going to have a second huge wave of the illness. But do start opening things up. We have to.
Somebody in the chat has a problem with the indoctrinated, you know, person who has 8 or 10 years of education on it and 13 years of experience. So you must be indoctrinated, right, Phil? So anyway, there's always somebody who's got to make their jabs. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Dr. Yoney. Thank you so much for coming on this evening, and maybe we'll have you back on again. Who knows? See how things play out in the next few weeks.
We'll see.
And well, thank you so much. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody. Good night for your participation in Super Chats. And again, if you want an early copy of the Islam versus Judaism in the Talmud, send in a donation and whatnot. Let me know, and we'll get that out to you. Take care, and good night.